Hey everyone, welcome back to CreepyCorner Stories. You know, diving into the dark web is always risky, but sharing these stories with you makes it worth it. I'm curious, where are you watching this from right now? Let me know in the comments below. I've noticed that these kinds of stories hit differently depending on where you are. It might even make the experience a little creepier. So, tell me, are you watching from the safety of your home or somewhere less secure? Okay, so before you call me stupid or reckless, let me just say, I didn't mean to end up on the dark web. I swear, I'm not one of those edgy hackers or wannabe cyber vigilantes. Honestly, I wouldn't even know how to open a Word document in Linux if my life depended on it. But I was bored out of my mind one Friday night, scrolling through Reddit and watching conspiracy videos on YouTube. You know, the ones where people claim they've found weird artifacts or evidence of parallel universes. Anyway, somehow, one link led to another, and before I knew it, I was staring at this shady-looking marketplace with listings for, well, let's just say, things that definitely weren't legal. Weapons, fake passports, you name it. I don't even know why I stayed on the site. Curiosity, maybe. Morbid fascination. Who knows? But what really caught my attention was this auction page for rare items of unknown origin. Now, I'm a sucker for weird collectibles. I've got a shelf full of random junk I found at estate sales. Old compasses, vintage cameras, that sort of thing. So, yeah, I clicked. Most of the listings were, honestly, kind of lame. Broken radios, rusted knives with mysterious pasts, and even a melted pocket watch someone claimed was from the Titanic. But then I saw it. Rolex model unknown, said to belong to time traveler, possibly not of earthly origin. The listing had this grainy photo of a sleek black watch with a weird greenish glow to it. It looked like a normal Rolex at first glance, but the face had these strange symbols around the numbers, like alien hieroglyphs or something. The description was wild. According to the seller, the watch had been recovered from a crash site in Siberia and supposedly once belonged to a time traveler who escaped the boundaries of our universe. I know it sounds ridiculous, like who even comes up with this stuff? But the longer I stared at the watch, the more I felt this pull. It was like I had to own it. The starting bid was $300, and I figured, hey, that's not much more than a regular watch, right? So, like an idiot, I made an account and placed a bid. That's when things got weird. About an hour after I placed my bid, I got an email. No sender address, no subject line, just a message that read, "You've been chosen." Chosen for what? I had no idea, but I figured it was some automated message tied to the auction, so I ignored it. The next morning, I woke up to another email. Congratulations, you've won the Rolex. Payment instructions attached. I remember thinking, wait, what? I hadn't even checked the auction again after placing my bid. Who bids on something like that and doesn't try to outbid someone else? Still, I was excited. I mean, it was a Rolex. A weird one, yeah, but who cares? So I followed the instructions, sent the payment through some sketchy crypto wallet, and waited. The package showed up 3 days later. No return address, no receipt, just a plain cardboard box with a layer of bubble wrap and the watch sitting inside. It looked even cooler in person. The black face glinted like obsidian, and the symbols around the edge seemed to shimmer when the light hit them. There was something deeply unsettling about it, though. The metal felt too cold, almost like it was alive. and when I strapped it onto my wrist, I swear I felt a jolt, like static electricity, but sharper. And then I noticed the countdown. It was subtle, almost easy to miss if you weren't looking closely. At the very top of the watch face, just above the 12 position, there was this tiny digital screen displaying a string of numbers, 23, 59, 46. At first, I thought it was some sort of stopwatch function, but as I watched, the numbers ticked down. Seconds, minutes, hours. I don't know why, but it gave me this sinking feeling in my gut. Like, what was it counting down to? I tried Googling it, of course. Rolex countdown timer. Weird symbols on Rolex. Alien Rolex from dark web. Yeah, I was grasping at straws. Nothing. I even posted about it on a few watch collector forums, but all I got were trolls telling me I'd been scammed, or people asking for the seller's info. One guy, probably a conspiracy nut, DM'd me and said the symbols looked similar to some kind of ancient Sumerian script, but I didn't even know how to begin verifying that. Then came the first incident. It was around 11 p.m. that night. I was sitting on my couch, scrolling TikTok and half watching Netflix in the background, when I noticed the countdown hit 000. For a second, nothing happened. I actually laughed at myself for being so on edge. But then, the watch beeped. It wasn't loud, more like a faint electronic chirp, but it was enough to make me jump. The face of the watch went dark for a moment, before flickering back to life, and the countdown reset. This time, it started at 2400 hours, another full day. But here's the thing. I swear the symbols around the edge had changed. They were subtle differences, like the lines were sharper or the shapes had shifted slightly, but they definitely weren't the same as before. That's when my phone buzzed. It was a notification from Instagram, a DM request from an account with no profile picture and a username that was just a string of random numbers and letters. The message was short. You're running out of time. Okay, I'm not gonna lie. I freaked out a little. I showed the message to my best friend Alex the next day, and he laughed it off, saying it was probably just some scammer messing with me. But when I went back to show him the account, it was gone. Like, completely wiped. Over the next couple of days, more weird stuff started happening. Random knocks on my door in the middle of the night, but no one was ever there when I checked. Streetlights flickering whenever I walked past them. My phone's battery draining out of nowhere, even though it was brand new. The countdown reset every night at the same time, and each time the symbols changed. I started taking pictures of the watch face and comparing them, trying to find some kind of pattern, but nothing made sense. And then, last night, the watch did something new. At exactly midnight, as the countdown hit 0, the symbols around the edge started glowing. Not brightly, just a faint greenish hue, like the glow in the dark stars I used to have on my bedroom ceiling as a kid. And then I noticed the shadows. They weren't normal. The way the light reflected off the watch created these long, twisting shapes on the walls of my room, like skeletal hands reaching out toward me. And I swear, for a split second, I saw one of them move. That's when I heard it. A voice, low and distorted, like someone whispering through a broken radio. It came from inside the watch, just loud enough for me to make out a single word. Run. Okay, so that's where I'm at right now. I don't know what the hell this thing is, or what it's counting down to, but I have a feeling I don't want to find out. The countdown resets again tonight, and I'm seriously debating whether I should just chuck this thing into a river and be done with it. but part of me needs to know. What happens when it reaches zero and doesn't reset? If anyone out there has seen anything like this before, or knows what the hell is going on, please let me know. I'm not sure how much time I have left. Alright, so here's the deal. I didn't sleep last night. At all. After the watch whispered to me, God, I still feel insane even typing that. I sat up in my room, staring at it on the desk like it was a live grenade. I could still hear that distorted voice in my head, the way it said, run, like a threat, but also not. It was like being told to flee from something that was already inside my house. By sunrise, I was a wreck. I knew I couldn't just sit in my apartment, freaking myself out any longer, so I grabbed the watch, stuffed it into my hoodie pocket, and headed out. I figured being around people would help, maybe clear my head. There's a Starbucks down the block that I always go to, the one with the big glass windows that overlook the main street. It's usually packed with students and tourists, and for once, I didn't mind the noise. I got my usual, an iced latte, and snagged a seat near the window. The morning rush was in full swing, people hustling to work, the baristas shouting out orders, the faint hum of pop music in the background. It felt normal, which was exactly what I needed. But the whole time, I could feel the weight of the watch in my pocket, like it was burning a hole through the fabric. That's when I noticed him. He was sitting at a table across the room, a guy in his late 30s or early 40s, wearing a crumpled black suit that looked like he'd slept in it. His face was pale, too pale, and his eyes were locked on me. Not in a casual passing glance kind of way either. This guy was staring like he knew something about me, like he'd been waiting for me to walk in. I tried to ignore him. I mean, it's a public place, right? People are weird sometimes, but every time I glanced up, his eyes were still on me, unblinking. I was about to get up and leave when he stood and started walking toward my table. "Nice watch," he said. I froze. It was still in my pocket, hidden from view, so there was no way he could have seen it. My heart was pounding as I stammered out something like, thanks, but I'm not wearing one." He smiled, this thin, creepy smile that didn't reach his eyes, and slid into the seat across from me, like we were old friends. "Oh, I think you know the one I mean," he said, leaning forward. His breath smelled like cigarettes and something metallic, like rust. "The Rolex. Tell me, has it started whispering to you yet?" My stomach dropped. I tried to play dumb, shaking my head and muttering something about him having the wrong person, but he just chuckled. "Don't bother lying. I can feel it from here. The energy. It's strong with yours, much stronger than the others." "What others?" I asked, before I could stop myself. His smile widened. "The other fools who've owned it, of course. Not many of them left, though. That's the thing about a watch like this. It has a way of shortening your lifespan." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a phone, swiping through it until he landed on a photo. "Here, let me show you the last owner." I didn't want to look, but curiosity got the better of me. The picture was of a guy around my age, sitting in what looked like a cheap motel room. He was holding the same watch, his face pale and gaunt, like he hadn't slept in weeks. There were dark stains on his shirt, bloodstains. "Found him in a ditch outside of Vegas," the man said, almost casually. "Throat slit. Shame, really. He was so close to solving it." "Solving what?" I hissed, trying to keep my voice low. My hands were shaking now, and I could feel the weight of the watch in my pocket, like a lead brick. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The countdown of course. You think it's just ticking away the hours? No, no, no. It's marking events, moments in time. Each reset brings you closer to the truth, but the closer you get, the more it takes from you. Sanity, safety, people you care about. I wanted to bolt, to run out of there and never look back, but I was frozen in place. "Who are you?" I finally managed to ask. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached across the table and grabbed my wrist with a grip like iron. Before I could pull away, he yanked the watch out of my pocket and held it up to his face. For a moment, his expression changed, like he was terrified, but then he smiled again and set it back on the table. "Good luck," he said, standing up. "You're going to need it." And just like that, he walked out, leaving me sitting there with my heart racing and a dozen pairs of eyes staring at me. I don't even remember leaving the Starbucks. I think I just grabbed the watch and bolted. Back in my apartment, I locked the door and checked every window twice before sitting down with the watch again. The countdown was still ticking, 14:23:7, but now the symbols were glowing faintly even in daylight. I thought about what the man had said, about it marking events instead of time, and that's when I noticed something else. The notifications. My phone was blowing up with messages from numbers I didn't recognize. Most of them were strings of gibberish, random letters and numbers that made no sense, but a few of them were worse, much worse. One of them was a photo of my apartment building, taken from the street. Another was of my door, the number 406 clearly visible. The most recent message was just 2 words: "Look outside." I didn't want to. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me not to, but I couldn't help it. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to see the street below. There was a car parked across the street, a black SUV with tinted windows. It hadn't been there before. As I watched, the driver's side door opened and a man stepped out. He was wearing a black suit, just like the guy from the Starbucks, and he was holding something in his hand. A knife. I stumbled back from the window, heart pounding. My first thought was to call the cops, but when I picked up my phone, the screen went black. No matter what I tried, it wouldn't turn on. Then, the lights in my apartment started flickering, and I heard the faint sound of something. No, someone whispering my name. That's when the countdown hit 0. I don't know how to describe what happened when the countdown hit 0. Words don't feel big enough for it. All I know is that the air in my apartment changed. It got heavy, like the room itself was pressing down on me, squeezing the life out of my lungs. And then, the whispering started again. It wasn't just one voice this time. It was dozens, maybe hundreds. Some were faint, almost too soft to hear, while others were louder, more distinct. Male, female, young, old. They all spoke at once, overlapping in a chaotic, guttural hum. And they all said the same thing, over and over. "He's coming." I couldn't move. My legs felt like cement, my body frozen in place as I stared at the watch sitting on my coffee table. The symbols around the edge were glowing brighter now, pulsing in rhythm with the whispers. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the sound stopped. Silence. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few seconds. My brain was screaming at me to do something, run, hide, smash the watch, but all I could do was stand there, staring at it, like a deer in headlights. That's when I heard the knock. 3 sharp, deliberate taps on my door. I flinched so hard, I almost fell over. My heart was hammering in my chest as I stared at the door. half expecting it to burst open. But nothing happened. Just another knock. Slower this time. Heavier. Whoever was on the other side wasn't in a rush. I backed away, keeping my eyes on the door as I fumbled for my phone. Still dead. Of course. My mind raced as I thought about the black SUV outside, the man with the knife, the guy from Starbucks, who knew way too much about the watch. Was it him? Had he followed me here? Or was it someone or something else? The knocking came again, louder this time, and I swear I could hear the wood splintering under the force of it. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the watch and bolted for the bathroom, locking the door behind me. It wasn't much of a plan, but at least I'd have a few seconds to figure out what to do next. I sat there on the cold tile floor, clutching the watch like a lifeline. The glow from the symbols lit up the tiny bathroom, casting eerie shadows on the walls. My brain was a mess of fear and adrenaline, and for a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could write this out. Maybe whoever was at the door would get bored and leave. And then I heard the whispering again. This time, it was coming from inside the bathroom. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The whispers were faint at first, like someone murmuring from the other side of a wall, but they grew louder, sharper, until I could make out individual words. They weren't just calling my name anymore. They were describing me. "He's scared," one voice said, clear and cold as ice. Heart racing, hands shaking. "Pathetic," another voice hissed. "He's not ready. He'll never be ready." I clamped my hands over my ears, trying to block them out, but it was no use. The voices were inside my head, crawling under my skin, gnawing at my sanity. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, one voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Open the door!" I didn't want to. God, I didn't want to. But my hand moved on its own, reaching for the lock. It was like I wasn't in control of my own body anymore, like something else had taken over. My fingers twisted the knob, and before I could stop myself, I opened the door. The hallway outside was dark. Too dark. The lights in my apartment were still flickering, but the space beyond the bathroom was pitch black, like the shadows had swallowed it whole. I could feel something standing there, just out of sight, watching me, waiting, and then it stepped into the light. It wasn't human, not entirely. Its body was tall and gaunt, its limbs too long, its skin stretched tight over sharp bones. The face, or what I guess you'd call a face, was a nightmare of jagged teeth and hollow eyes that glowed faintly green, like the symbols on the watch. It was dressed in tattered black clothes, and in its hands it held something that made my stomach drop. A mirror. The thing raised the mirror, angling it so I could see my own reflection. But what I saw wasn't me. Not really. The person in the mirror looked like me, sure, but their skin was pale and sunken, their eyes wide with terror. Blood dripped from the corner of their mouth, and when they opened it to scream, the sound that came out wasn't human. The creature tilted its head, as if amused, and then it spoke. Its voice was deep and guttural, like grinding metal. "Do you understand now?" I didn't, not even a little. But before I could say anything, the mirror shattered, and the creature was gone. Just like that. 1 second it was there, and the next, I was standing alone in my apartment, my heart racing, and my ears ringing. I don't remember much of what happened after that. I think I blacked out for a while, because the next thing I knew, it was morning. The sun was shining through my windows, the apartment was quiet, and the watch was still sitting on the bathroom floor, ticking away like nothing had happened. The countdown had reset again. 23, 59, 59. But there was something different this time. A new symbol had appeared on the face of the watch, larger and more distinct than the others. It looked like an eye, staring back at me, watching. That's when I noticed the blood. It was smeared across the floor, leading from the bathroom to the front door. Dark, sticky streaks that looked like someone had been dragged. My stomach churned as I followed the trail, half expecting to find a body. But when I opened the door, the hallway was empty. Well, almost empty. There was something sitting just outside my door, a package wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address. My name was scrawled across the top in jagged, uneven letters, like it had been written by someone who'd never held a pen before. I didn't want to open it. Every instinct in my body told me to throw it away, to run as far from it as I could. But I didn't. I brought it inside, set it on the table, and peeled back the paper. Inside was a Polaroid photo. It was of me. Not a selfie, not some candid shot taken by a friend. This was a picture of me, sitting on the bathroom floor, clutching the watch. The blood on the floor was fresh in the photo, still glistening under the dim light. And in the background, barely visible in the shadows, was the creature, watching me. My hands are shaking as I write this. I don't know what's happening. I don't know who sent the photo or how they got into my apartment without me noticing. But one thing is clear. The watch isn't just counting down. It's connected to something bigger, something darker. And whatever it is, it's coming for me. I didn't leave my apartment all day. Hell, I barely moved from my spot on the couch, staring at the Polaroid with the creature looming behind me. Every time I tried to rationalize it, maybe it was fake, maybe someone had staged it, my brain screamed at me, "You know it's real." The blood on the floor had dried by now, but I hadn't cleaned it up. It felt pointless, like washing it away would only make things worse. The watch was still ticking down, a constant reminder that my time was running out, but I couldn't bring myself to even touch it. It sat on the coffee table, glaring at me with its alien symbols and that unblinking eye. By the time the countdown hit 8 a.m., the sunlight outside was starting to fade. Normally I'd turn on the lights, but I couldn't bring myself to. The glow from the watch was the only light in the room, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. It felt fitting in a way. I had no plan, no idea what I was supposed to do. Every instinct told me to run, but run where? The watch had made it clear that there was no escaping this. Whatever was happening, it was tied to me now, like a parasite burrowing deeper into my soul with every passing hour. And then the black SUV showed up again. I spotted it from the window, parked across the street like it had been the night before. This time, though, there were no shadows moving inside, no man stepping out with a knife. It just sat there, silent and motionless, like it was waiting for me. My phone buzzed, and for a split second, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe it was Alex, or someone from work, someone normal. But when I picked it up, my stomach sank. Another message. This one wasn't from some anonymous number, though. It was from my own phone number. The text was simple. "You need to see this." Attached was a video. I hesitated. Every nerve in my body screamed at me not to watch it, but I couldn't help myself. My thumb hovered over the screen for what felt like an eternity before I finally pressed play. The video was grainy, like it had been shot on an old camcorder. It showed a room, dimly lit, with peeling wallpaper and a single bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling. At first, it was hard to make out what I was looking at. The camera was shaking, the angle awkward, but then it panned down, and my blood ran cold. There was a man tied to a chair in the middle of the room, his head lolled forward, his face obscured by a curtain of greasy hair. His shirt was torn, and dark stains spread across his chest. The sound of heavy breathing filled the speakers, low and guttural, like whoever was holding the camera was struggling to contain themselves. The man in the chair lifted his head slightly, and my heart stopped. It was the guy from Starbucks, the one who'd grabbed my wrist and told me about the watch. His face was pale, his lips cracked, and his eyes wide with terror. The camera shifted, zooming in on his face, and that's when I noticed the writing scrawled across his forehead. 3 words, written in what looked like blood. It takes all. The breathing grew louder, more erratic, and then the camera jerked upward. A figure stepped into frame, dressed in black from head to toe. Their face was hidden behind a featureless white mask, but their hands were bare, thin, bony fingers that gripped a knife far too large for their frame. "No," the man in the chair whimpered. "Please, I told you everything I know. Please, don't." The figure didn't speak. They raised the knife, the blade catching the light, and brought it down in a single, brutal motion. The man screamed, a raw animal sound that echoed in my skull long after the video ended. I dropped my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely breathe. I scrambled to delete the video, but it wouldn't let me. Every time I tried, the screen would flash, and a message would appear. "You can't escape this." By the time the countdown hit 2 a.m., I was losing it. The SUV was still parked outside. The lights in my apartment had started flickering again, and the whispers were back, soft, almost imperceptible, like they were coming from the walls themselves. I tried calling Alex, but the call wouldn't go through. Every time I dialed, I'd hear static, followed by a faint, distorted voice, repeating one word over and over. "Run!" I was about to throw my phone across the room when I heard the knock again. This time, it wasn't coming from the front door. It was coming from inside the apartment. I froze. My eyes darted to the hallway, half expecting to see the creature from the bathroom again. But the shadows were empty. The knock came again, louder now, and I realized it was coming from my bedroom. I don't know why I went toward it. Some morbid curiosity, maybe, or just sheer desperation to end this nightmare. My feet felt like lead as I made my way down the hallway, the glow from the watch casting eerie shapes on the walls. When I reached the door, I stopped, my hand hovering over the knob. The knocking stopped. I should have turned around. I should have walked away. But instead, I opened the door. The room was empty. The bed, the dresser, the pile of dirty clothes in the corner. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. But the window was open. I hadn't opened it. I never opened it. The curtains billowed gently in the breeze, and just as I was about to close it, I saw the figure standing in the alley below. It wasn't the man from the SUV. It wasn't the creature from before, either. This figure was smaller, almost childlike, but there was something wrong about the way it moved. Its head jerked from side to side, its limbs twisting unnaturally as it looked up at me. And then it smiled. Not a human smile. Not even close. Its mouth stretched impossibly wide, splitting its face in half and revealing rows of jagged, needle-like teeth. It raised one hand and pointed directly at me, and that's when I realized it wasn't pointing at me. It was pointing at the watch. When the countdown hit 0000, I blacked out. I don't know how long I was out. When I woke up, the watch was gone. My apartment was trashed, furniture overturned, walls scratched, like something had been trying to claw its way out. And scrawled across the floor in dark, sticky letters were the same 3 words from the man's forehead. It takes all. But the worst part, the Polaroid had changed. The picture was still of me, still in the bathroom, but this time I wasn't alone. The creature was standing right behind me, its skeletal hand resting on my shoulder, and it was smiling. When I came to, the apartment wasn't silent anymore. There was this sound, a faint, rhythmic clicking. It wasn't loud, but it cut through everything like a metronome for my fear. At first, I thought it was the watch. I thought maybe it had fallen under the couch or wedged itself somewhere in the chaos. But as I sat up, trembling, I realized the sound was coming from the kitchen. Click, click, click. It was methodical, deliberate, like someone tapping a knife against a counter. I didn't want to move. I didn't even want to breathe, but my body wasn't listening to me anymore. I got up, stepping over the shattered remains of my coffee table, the bloodied words on the floor, the scattered pieces of a life that didn't feel like mine anymore. The closer I got to the kitchen, the colder it got. Not just physically, I mean this bone-deep cold, the kind that makes your teeth ache and your skin crawl. The light was flickering again, but it was slower this time, like the room itself was breathing. And then I saw him. The man from the black SUV was sitting at my kitchen table. He was wearing the same crumpled suit, his head tilted at an odd angle, like his neck had been snapped. His eyes were wide open, bloodshot, and staring directly at me. His mouth was twisted into this grotesque grin, the corners stretched so far back they'd torn the skin. In his hand, he held the watch. Click, click, click. He was tapping it against the edge of the table, the symbols on the face glowing faintly in the dim light. But the countdown wasn't ticking anymore. It was frozen at 0000, and the eye in the center of the watch seemed to pulse like it was alive, watching me. "Sit down," he said, his voice raw and wet, like he'd been screaming for hours. I didn't move. I couldn't. My legs felt like they'd turned to jelly, and my brain was screaming at me to run, to do anything, but all I could do was stand there, frozen in place. I said, "Sit down," he repeated, slamming the watch onto the table. The sound was like a gunshot, and it jolted me out of my trance. My legs moved on their own, carrying me to the chair across from him. I sat down, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. He leaned forward, his grin never faltering, and slid the watch across the table toward me. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. I shook my head, my throat too dry to speak. "It's a key," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "A key to something bigger than you could ever imagine, and you've already unlocked the first door." "What? What door?" I finally managed to croak. He chuckled, a deep, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. "You felt it, didn't you? The pull, the need to have it. That's how it starts. It chooses you, binds itself to you, and then it starts peeling away the layers, your mind, your body, your soul, until there's nothing left." I wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, but my voice caught in my throat. Instead, I stared at the watch, the glowing symbols reflected in my tear-filled eyes. "It's not about the countdown," he continued. "It's about what happens when it ends. Every time it hits 0, you lose a piece of yourself. Memories, people, sanity. It takes all, and when there's nothing left to take..." He trailed off, his grin widening impossibly. "Then what?" I whispered. His bloodshot eyes bore into mine. "Then it moves on to the next idiot who thinks they've stumbled onto some rare cosmic treasure. And you? You're left behind. Empty. Forgotten." Before I could respond, he slammed the watch against the table again, and the symbols flared to life, casting the room in an eerie green glow. The air grew heavier, thicker, and I felt the walls closing in around me. "You want to know the worst part?" he asked, his voice low and venomous. "You can't get rid of it. You can't break it. You can't destroy it. Believe me, I've tried. It always comes back." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. No, there has to be a way. There has to be." He laughed again, louder this time, and the sound echoed through the apartment like thunder. "You still don't get it, do you? There's no escape, no redemption. You can't run from it. You can't hide from it. The only thing you can do is wait until it finishes with you." The light from the watch grew brighter, the symbols twisting and shifting like they were alive. The eye in the center stared at me, unblinking, and I felt something deep inside me crack, like a thread snapping, a part of myself unraveling. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. The eye held me in place, dragging me deeper and deeper into its gaze. The man's laughter faded, replaced by the whispers, the same voices I'd heard before, but louder now, more frantic. They spoke over one another, a cacophony of desperation and malice. And then, everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying in the middle of the street. The sun was just starting to rise, casting the world in a soft, orange glow. My clothes were torn, my hands scraped and bloodied, and the watch was gone. For a moment, I thought maybe it was over. Maybe whatever nightmare I'd been trapped in had finally ended. But then I heard it, the faint sound of a countdown ticking, coming from somewhere deep inside my head. I stumbled to my feet, looking around. The street was deserted, the building silent and lifeless. But as I turned to head home, if I even had a home anymore, I saw it, the figure from the alley. It was standing at the end of the street, its twisted limbs silhouetted against the rising sun. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, staring at me with that impossible grin, and then it raised its hand, pointing to something behind me. I turned, my heart hammering in my chest, and saw the reflection in a shattered storefront window. It wasn't me, not anymore. My skin was pale and sunken, my eyes hollow and glowing faintly green, and on my wrist the watch had returned, its symbols burning like fire. The countdown had restarted, 23, 59, 59, and this time I knew what it was counting down to. To this day, I don't know how much of me is still me. I don't know how much time I have left, or what will be waiting for me when the countdown reaches 0 again. All I know is that it's not over. It's never over, because the watch doesn't just take, it becomes. I discovered a secret Reddit thread about a dark web cult. Every time I refresh the page, they upload a photo of my house. Alright, so I'm gonna preface this by saying I'm not some tech genius or hacker or anything like that. I'm just a regular dude who got in way over his head. Like, I wish I could go back and smack myself in the face level of over my head. This all started about 2 months ago, and I swear to God, it still doesn't feel real. I honestly wish I was making this up, but I'm not. Anyway, let me just get into it before I start second-guessing myself. So, Like I said, I'm a pretty normal guy. I work at a Starbucks in Seattle. You know, the original Starbucks city. It's nothing fancy, but it pays the bills, and the free coffee doesn't hurt. Most nights after work, I just scroll Reddit or YouTube until I pass out. I've always been one of those people who gets a little too curious for their own good. Like, I'll watch hours of conspiracy theory videos, deep dive into weird subreddits, that sort of thing. It's not that I believe in half the stuff I see. I just like the thrill of it, you know? Well, one night, I stumbled on a subreddit that wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. It didn't even have a proper name. Just some random string of letters and numbers, like r/3x2j4k1 or something. I don't even know how I got there, but the post that caught my attention was titled, "The Cult of the Grey Room." Now, tell me, that doesn't sound like a horror movie title. It was late, probably around 2 a.m., and I figured, why not? Let's see what kind of weird rabbit hole I'm about to fall into. So, I clicked on it. Bad idea. The post was written in this weird, almost poetic language, like the kind of stuff you'd hear in some old-timey cult documentary. It talked about this group that meets in the Grey Room, a place between shadows and light, where they perform rituals to unravel the fabric of reality. Yeah, it was weird as hell, but I figured it was just some LARPers or edgy teenagers trying to freak people out. The post had maybe 10 upvotes, no comments, and it looked like it had been buried for weeks. Still, I was intrigued. The thing is, it wasn't just one post. There were dozens of them, all written by different usernames, but with the same creepy vibe. Stuff like, "The truth lies beyond the mirrors," and "The Grey Room sees all." Every single one had the same cryptic energy, like an inside joke that no one wanted to explain. Most of the posts had these blurry black and white photos attached. Some looked like old, abandoned buildings. Others were just empty rooms with weird symbols scratched into the walls. One of them straight up gave me chills. It was a photo of a door, just a plain wooden door, but someone had carved a giant eye into it, and underneath was a phrase in blood-red paint, "We see you." So yeah, by this point, I'm officially creeped out. But of course, I keep scrolling because apparently I have no sense of self-preservation. That's when I found the link. At the bottom of one of the posts, there was a link to an external website. I won't post the URL here because frankly, I don't want anyone else to make the same mistake I did. But it wasn't one of those obvious sketchy deep web links you hear about. Just a regular .com address. Against my better judgment, I clicked on it. The website was unsettling, to say the least. It was completely gray, with nothing on the homepage except a single text box that said, "Enter the key." I had no idea what that meant, but I'd seen enough movies to know this was probably a bad idea. I should have closed the tab right there, but I didn't. Instead, I went back to the subreddit and started combing through the comments, hoping someone had explained what the key was. That's when I noticed something strange. Every single time I refreshed the page, a new post would appear. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but no. Every time I clicked the refresh button, there it was, a brand new post, and they were all addressed to me. Like, literally to me. My username was in the titles. "Hello, username. Welcome to the Grey Room. Did you like what you saw? We're waiting." My heart started racing. There's no way this was real, right? I'd never commented on this subreddit, never even visited it before tonight. How the hell did they know my username? I tried telling myself it was just some kind of weird algorithm or a troll who somehow figured out I was lurking. But then, the photos started changing. One of the new posts had an image attached. When I opened it, I felt like the air got sucked out of the room. It was a picture of my street. My actual street. You know that weird angle Google Street View sometimes gets? Like when the camera glitches. Yeah, it was like that. But it was definitely my block. My apartment building was right there, clear as day. I slammed my laptop shut so hard, I thought I broke the screen. My hands were shaking, and my brain was going 1,000,000 miles a minute. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe they pulled some random street view photo, and I was freaking myself out over nothing. But then my phone buzzed. It was a notification from Reddit. Someone had replied to my comment on another subreddit, one of those generic best memes of the week threads I'd commented on hours earlier. I opened it, hoping it would distract me, but the reply was from a user I didn't recognize. Their comment: "Nice apartment, username. Too bad your curtains are still open." I swear to God, I almost threw my phone across the room. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every little sound in my apartment had me jumping out of my skin. Creaks, distant sirens, even my own refrigerator humming. I kept staring at my windows, imagining some shadowy figure standing outside, watching me. The worst part? My curtains really were open. Whoever sent that message wasn't bluffing. I finally convinced myself to close the curtains, but I didn't dare turn off the lights. I sat on my couch, my laptop sitting like a bomb on the coffee table. Every instinct I had was screaming to just chuck it out the window or smash it with a hammer. But I couldn't. I had to know what was happening. Who were these people? How did they find me? So, after hours of pacing around my apartment, I finally worked up the nerve to open my laptop again. My hands were sweaty, shaking so bad I could barely type my password. When the screen loaded, the first thing I saw was Reddit still open in my browser. That cursed subreddit. Against all logic, I refreshed the page again. Another new post. The title: "Turn around." My stomach dropped. I felt like I couldn't breathe. It was one of those moments where your brain just freezes. I didn't want to look, but I also couldn't not look. I slowly turned my head, expecting what? Someone standing in the shadows of my living room, a face pressed against my window. But there was nothing, just my cluttered apartment, bathed in the harsh glow of my desk lamp. I whipped my head back to the screen, and that's when I noticed the attached image. I clicked on it, and my heart felt like it stopped. It was a picture of me, sitting on my couch, staring at my laptop, my exact position from just a few seconds ago. The photo was taken from behind me, and it was crystal clear. Every little detail was there. My rumpled hoodie, the coffee mug on the table, the curtains I'd just closed. And in the corner of the image, I could see a sliver of movement. Someone's hand, disappearing into the shadows. I don't know how long I stared at that photo, but eventually, panic took over. I jumped up, grabbing the nearest thing I could find. A baseball bat I'd bought at a thrift store years ago and never actually used. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst. I checked every inch of my apartment, the closets, under the bed, even the shower. Nothing. No one was there. But the picture didn't lie. Someone had been in my apartment. Someone had taken that photo. I wanted to call the cops. That was the logical thing to do, right? But here's the thing. What was I supposed to tell them? "Hey, officer, someone posted a picture of me on Reddit. and now I think they're in my apartment. I could already hear how ridiculous it sounded in my head. They'd probably assume I was on drugs and write me off. So, instead, I did what every dumbass in a horror movie does. I stayed. I locked the door, pushed my couch in front of it for good measure, and sat there, clutching the bat like it was the only thing keeping me alive. I thought about deleting my Reddit account, but something told me it wouldn't matter. These people, whoever they were, had already found me. Deleting my account wouldn't change that. Eventually, exhaustion got the better of me. I must have dozed off on the couch, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the cracks in my curtains. For a split second, I thought maybe it had all been some messed up nightmare, but then I saw my laptop, still open on the coffee table, and reality came crashing back. The subreddit was still up, and of course, there was another new post waiting for me. The title was simple, "Good morning," but this time, there was no text, just another image. I opened it, and I swear to God, I almost threw up. It was another picture of my apartment, but this one was different. It was taken from outside, looking in through my living room window. The curtains were still drawn, but there was just enough of a gap for the camera to catch me sleeping on the couch, the bat still clutched in my hands. And that's when I saw it. In the background of the photo, standing in the corner of my living room, was a figure. Tall, blurry, almost like they were fading into the wall. But they were there, watching me, waiting. At this point, I was full on panicking. I grabbed my phone and started dialing 911, but I stopped halfway through. My phone buzzed in my hand. A new notification. It was a DM on Reddit from one of the accounts that had been posting on the subreddit. The message said, "If you call them, we'll know." I dropped my phone like it had burned me. How the hell did they know what I was doing? Were they watching me in real time? The thought made my skin crawl. I felt like an animal, cornered with no way out. I decided to go outside, hoping I could maybe lose whoever was watching me, or at least get to a public place where I wouldn't feel so vulnerable. I grabbed my keys, shoved my laptop into my backpack, and bolted out the door. The second I stepped outside, the cold Seattle air hit me like a slap to the face. It was still early, barely 7 a.m., and the streets were mostly empty. I walked quickly, keeping my head down, trying to convince myself that I was being paranoid. Maybe this was just some elaborate prank. But then I noticed something. A man in a black hoodie, leaning against a lamppost about a block away. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, looking at his phone. But as soon as I turned the corner, he started walking, slowly, casually, like he didn't want me to notice. I turned another corner, picking up my pace. When I glanced back, he was still there, just a little closer now. My heart was racing again, and I was sweating despite the chill. I ducked into a Starbucks, one I didn't work at, thankfully, and grabbed a seat by the window. I told myself it was fine. I was overreacting. But when I looked outside, the guy was standing across the street, staring right at me. I couldn't take it anymore. I opened my laptop, desperate for answers. The subreddit was still there, taunting me with its cryptic posts. I went back to the website, the one with the gray homepage and the text box. I stared at it for a long time before finally typing the only thing I could think of. Why me? The screen went black for a few seconds, and then new text appeared. Because you looked. Before I could process what that meant, the site refreshed itself. This time, there was a new image on the screen. It was me, sitting in that Starbucks, my face frozen in terror as I stared at my laptop, and in the reflection of the window behind me, I could see him, the man in the black hoodie, standing right behind me. I froze. I didn't even dare to breathe. My eyes stayed glued to the laptop screen, where my reflection, the one in the Starbucks window, stared back at me. The man in the black hoodie stood right behind me, his figure blurry but unmistakable. He wasn't moving. He didn't need to. His presence was enough to paralyze me completely. For what felt like an eternity, I sat there, trying to process what I was seeing. My mind was screaming at me to turn around, but my body refused to listen. Finally, I mustered the courage to glance over my shoulder, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it might explode. But he wasn't there. The corner of the Starbucks, where I'd expected him to be, was empty. Just a wall covered with cheap artwork and a bulletin board advertising local yoga classes. My eyes darted around the shop, scanning every face, every corner, every shadow. Nothing. It was like he had vanished. I looked back at my laptop. The photo was still there, taunting me. It didn't make sense. Had it been taken earlier? Was it staged? Was someone messing with me? My thoughts spiraled, but one thing was clear. I couldn't stay there. I slammed my laptop shut, shoved it into my backpack, and bolted out the door. The streets were busier now. Morning commuters rushed past, lost in their own little worlds, oblivious to the panic etched across my face. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I needed to be around people. Lots of people. Somewhere crowded and public, where I couldn't be cornered. I ended up at Pike Place Market. If you've never been there, it's this huge, bustling place, full of vendors selling everything from fresh seafood to handmade jewelry. Normally, it's kind of charming, but today, it felt suffocating. Every person I passed felt like a potential threat. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see the man in the black hoodie trailing me again. I found a spot by one of the stalls, tucked myself into a corner, and pulled out my phone. I didn't care anymore if they were watching. I needed help. I dialed my best friend Jake. We've known each other since high school, and if anyone could talk me down from the ledge, it was him. He picked up on the third ring. "Yo, what's up?" His voice was groggy. I'd forgotten it was still early. "Jake," I whispered, glancing around nervously. "I need you to listen to me. I'm in some serious shit." There was a pause. Okay? What kind of shit are we talking about?" I tried to explain, but the words came out in a jumbled mess. Something about the subreddit, the photos, the guy in the hoodie. I probably sounded insane, but Jake didn't interrupt. When I finally finished, there was another long silence. "Dude," he said slowly, "are you messing with me? Because this is not funny." "Do I sound like I'm messing with you?" I snapped, a little louder than I intended. A few people nearby gave me weird looks. All right, chill. Look, just stay where you are, okay? I'll come meet you." "No," I said quickly. "No, I can't stay in one spot. They're watching me, Jake. They know where I am." He sighed. "Okay, then come to my place. We'll figure this out together." It sounded like the best option I had, so I agreed. Jake lived about a 15-minute walk from the market. I started heading in that direction, keeping my head down and my pace brisk. Every time I passed a reflective surface, a car window, a shop display, I checked for anyone following me. I didn't see anyone, but the feeling of being watched never went away. When I got to Jake's apartment, I practically collapsed into his couch. He took one look at me and muttered, "Jesus, you look like shit." Then he handed me a beer, which I downed in about 2 seconds flat, So, he said, sitting across from me, start from the beginning. What the hell is going on? I told him everything. This time, I was more coherent, walking him through the subreddit, the photos, the website, all of it. He listened intently, his face growing more serious with every detail. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. Okay, he said finally. That's messed up. But are you sure this isn't just some elaborate prank? Like, maybe someone you know is screwing with you? I thought about that, I admitted. But how would they take a picture of me inside my apartment? And that guy in the hoodie, he was real, Jake. I saw him. Jake nodded, but he didn't look convinced. All right, let's see this subreddit. I hesitated. I don't think that's a good idea. Every time I go back there, things get worse. Dude, we need to figure out what's going on. Just show me. Reluctantly, I pulled out my laptop and opened the subreddit. To my surprise, it was completely empty. No posts, no comments, nothing. It was like the entire thing had been wiped. Convenient, Jake muttered. No, I swear, it was all here, I said, scrolling furiously. The posts, the photos, they were right here. Okay, chill, he said. What about the website? I typed in the URL, but this time the site wouldn't load. Just an error message. 404, page not found. Jake gave me a look that screamed, "You're losing it." I'm not crazy, Jake, I snapped. I know what I saw. All right, relax. Let's try something else. He grabbed his phone and started Googling phrases like the grey room and dark web cults. Most of the results were just random conspiracy theories and creepypasta stories. Nothing even close to what I'd experienced. And then his phone buzzed. Jake frowned and opened the notification. It was a text. His face went pale as he read it, and he slowly turned the screen toward me. The text was from an unknown number. It said, "Helping him was a mistake." Before I could react, my own phone buzzed. I pulled it out with trembling hands and saw a similar text. "Run." Jake and I stared at each other, the air between us heavy with dread. "What the hell is this?" he whispered. A loud bang suddenly shattered the silence. It came from the front door. Jake jumped up, his face a mix of confusion and fear. "Who the hell?" Before he could finish, the door burst open, slamming against the wall. Two men in black hoodies stormed in, their faces obscured by masks. One of them had something in his hand, a crowbar. "Run!" I screamed, grabbing Jake's arm, but it was too late. The guy with the crowbar swung it, hitting Jake square in the side of the head. The sound was sickening, a dull, wet thud that I'll never forget. Jake crumpled to the floor, blood pooling beneath him. I barely had time to react before the second man lunged at me. I scrambled backward, tripping over the coffee table and falling hard onto my back. He stood over me, raising the crowbar. I thought that was it, that I was about to die. But then he stopped. He tilted his head, like he was studying me, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out the door, his partner following close behind. I crawled over to Jake, shaking him, begging him to wake up, but he didn't move. That's when I saw it. On the floor next to him was a piece of paper, folded neatly. I picked it up with trembling hands and opened it. Scrawled in red ink were 3 words. "You were warned." Jake was dead. I knew it the moment I saw his lifeless eyes staring back at me. His blood was still warm, seeping into the cracks of the cheap laminate floor. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the piece of paper. "You were warned." My brain felt like it was short-circuiting. I couldn't process what had just happened. I wanted to scream, to cry, but I didn't have the luxury of either. My instincts finally kicked in, and I realized one horrifying fact. They were still out there. Whoever they were. I didn't have time to think. I grabbed my laptop and bolted out the door, leaving Jake's body behind. I couldn't afford to be there when the cops showed up. How would I explain this? 2 masked men breaking into the apartment, Jake's crushed skull, and a cryptic note. I'd sound insane. And if I stayed, I knew they'd come back for me. I ran for what felt like hours, my backpack slamming against my shoulders with every step. The streets of Seattle blurred together in my panic. It was just past noon now, and the city was alive with people. They had no idea what had just happened. No idea that I was running for my life, my best friend dead, and God knows what coming next. I ended up at a McDonald's, one of those grimy ones that smell like grease and desperation. It was packed with people, kids running around with Happy Meals, an old guy nursing a coffee, a couple arguing over fries. It wasn't safe, but it felt safer than being alone on the streets. I grabbed a corner booth, sat with my back to the wall, and tried to calm my breathing. My laptop was still in my bag. I didn't want to open it, but I needed answers. I needed to know what the hell was going on. So, reluctantly, I powered it on. My screen loaded, and there it was, the subreddit. It shouldn't have been possible. I'd seen it wiped clean. Jake had seen it. But now, the posts were back. All of them. The cryptic messages, the photos, everything. Except now, there was a new post pinned at the top. The title, Jake's Sacrifice. I stared at the screen, my stomach churning. My hands hovered over the trackpad, every instinct screaming at me not to click it. But of course, I did. The post was short, just a single sentence. He shouldn't have gotten involved. Underneath was an image. I didn't want to look. But I did. It was a photo of Jake's body, the same angle I'd seen before I ran, but somehow worse. His face was contorted in an unnatural way, his jaw slack, blood running in thin rivers across the floor. But the most disturbing part, in the background of the photo, I could see myself, standing over him, holding the note. I slammed the laptop shut, bile rising in my throat. They were watching me. Even now, in this crowded McDonald's, they were watching. I felt exposed, like there were eyes on me from every corner of the room. My skin crawled, and I had to fight the urge to scream. My phone buzzed, snapping me out of my spiral. A text. This time, it was from a number I didn't recognize. The message was simple. Time to go home. I stared at it, my blood turning to ice. My home. They wanted me to go back. They were luring me into some kind of trap. But why? Why hadn't they just killed me when they had the chance? What were they waiting for? I didn't respond. Instead, I did something desperate, something stupid. I called the police. It was a burner number, one I'd picked up after Jake's death, just in case. When the dispatcher answered, I blurted out the whole story. The break-in, the murder, everything. I left out the subreddit stuff, knowing it would make me sound crazy. They told me to stay put. An officer would meet me at the McDonald's. For the first time all day, I felt a sliver of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely alone in this. The officer showed up about 20 minutes later. A young guy, barely older than me, with tired eyes and a stiff posture. I told him everything again, this time more carefully, leaving out anything that might sound like I'd lost my mind. He nodded along, scribbling in his notebook. but I could tell he wasn't taking me seriously. "Do you have any proof of this break-in?" he asked finally. I hesitated. "Not exactly, but my friend Jake, he's dead. You need to go to his apartment." The officer sighed, glancing at his watch. "All right, let's go check it out." Relief washed over me. I followed him out of the McDonald's, keeping close as we walked back toward Jake's place. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting the men in hoodies to appear out of nowhere. But the streets were quiet, almost eerily so. When we got to Jake's building, the officer asked me to wait outside while he went in. I stood there on the curb, my heart racing, staring up at the windows of Jake's apartment. I kept telling myself everything would be fine. The cops would handle it. They'd find the killers, and this nightmare would finally be over. But when the officer came back, his face was pale. His hands were shaking. There's nothing in there," he said. "What do you mean?" I demanded. "I saw him. He's dead." The officer shook his head. "The apartment's empty. No blood, no body, nothing." My legs almost gave out. "That's not possible. I was there. I saw him. Before I could finish, my phone buzzed again. Another text. This time, the message was a photo. It was Jake's apartment, taken from inside. The furniture was gone, the walls stripped bare, but there was one thing in the center of the room. My backpack. I lost it. I shoved past the officer and ran into the building. He shouted after me, but I didn't care. I needed to see it for myself. When I got to Jake's apartment, the door was wide open. The place was exactly like the photo, empty, except for my backpack, sitting dead center on the floor. I approached it slowly, every step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached it, I hesitated, my hands hovering over the zipper. I didn't want to know what was inside, but I had to. I unzipped it. Inside was my laptop. Nothing else. Just the laptop, sitting there like it had been waiting for me. I pulled it out, opened it, and the screen flickered to life. The subreddit was gone. In its place was a single line of text. "Come to the Grey Room." Underneath was a new link. Not a URL this time, just coordinates. I stared at them, my mind racing. The officer appeared in the doorway behind me, his face a mix of confusion and concern. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My eyes were locked on the screen, on those coordinates. I didn't know what was waiting for me at the Grey Room, but one thing was clear. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I didn't want to go. Every cell in my body screamed against it. But what choice did I have? They'd killed Jake, erased him like he was nothing. They'd gotten inside my apartment, my life, my head. If I ignored the coordinates, they'd come for me anyway. And somehow, I knew this wouldn't end until I faced whatever, or whoever, was waiting for me in the Grey Room. The officer was still talking, but his voice was muffled, like I was hearing it underwater. He kept asking questions, demanding answers, but none of it mattered. All I could focus on were the numbers on my laptop screen, the coordinates. They were etched into my brain now, pulsing like a heartbeat. Without a word, I shoved the laptop back into my backpack and walked out. The officer shouted after me, but I didn't stop. He didn't follow. Maybe he sensed it too, that whatever was happening was way out of his depth. The coordinates led me to the outskirts of the city, to an industrial park I'd never been to before. It was the kind of place that looked abandoned during the day and outright sinister at night. Rows of decaying warehouses loomed like skeletons against the overcast sky. their windows shattered, their walls covered in graffiti. There was no one around. No cars, no pedestrians, not even the distant hum of traffic. Just silence. I parked my car outside a building that matched the coordinates. It was massive, the kind of place that might have been a factory once, but now it was just a hollow shell. The door was slightly ajar, swaying gently in the breeze. As I approached, I noticed something carved into the rusted metal. An eye. The same eye I'd seen in the photos. The same eye from the door on that subreddit. This was it. The grey room. The air inside was damp and smelled like mildew and rust. My footsteps echoed as I moved through the dark, cavernous space. The only light came from the faint glow of my phone screen, which I used to navigate. Every creak, every distant sound made me jump. I kept expecting someone, or something, to lunge at me from the shadows. After what felt like an eternity, I found the door. It was smaller than I'd expected, plain and unremarkable, except for the symbol painted on it. A red eye, staring straight ahead. Below it, in the same blood-red paint, were the words, "There is no turning back." I hesitated. My whole body was shaking, and for a moment, I thought about running, just bolting back to my car and driving until I ran out of gas. But I knew that wouldn't work. They'd find me. They always found me. So, I pushed the door open. The grey room was underwhelming at first glance. It was just a square room with concrete walls and a single, flickering fluorescent light overhead. The air was cold, and the walls were covered in strange symbols. Circles, lines, shapes I didn't recognize. But the thing that caught my attention was in the center of the room. A chair. It wasn't just any chair. It was an old wooden one, the kind you'd find in a creepy farmhouse or a low-budget horror movie. The wood was splintered, stained with something dark that I didn't want to think about. Sitting on the chair was a laptop. My laptop. I approached slowly, every nerve in my body on high alert. As I got closer, I realized the laptop was on. The screen was glowing, and there was a single file open. A video. The file name? Watch. I didn't want to. God, I didn't want to. But I couldn't stop myself. My hands moved on their own, clicking the play button. The video started with static. Then, slowly, an image came into focus. It was me, sitting in Jake's apartment, staring at the note. The footage was shaky, like it had been filmed with a handheld camera. My heart sank as I realized what this meant. Someone had been in the room with me that whole time. The video continued, showing me running out of the apartment, the officer arriving, me finding the empty room with my backpack. Every moment was captured in perfect detail, like someone had been following me with a camera the entire time. And then the video changed. The screen cut to a different room, one I didn't recognize. It was dark, lit only by a single, swinging bulb. In the center of the frame was a person. At least I think it was a person. They were strapped to a chair, their head covered with a burlap sack. Their breathing was shallow, panicked. A voice spoke from off-camera, distorted and inhuman. "Do you see now? Do you understand?" The person in the chair started struggling, thrashing against their restraints. The voice laughed, a deep, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. And then, without warning, a hand reached into the frame, holding a knife. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The knife plunged downward, and the person in the chair let out a muffled scream. Blood splattered across the screen, and the video cut to static. I was shaking, tears streaming down my face. My whole body felt like it was shutting down. But before I could process what I'd just seen, the video cut back to me. Present me, sitting in the grey room, watching the video. I whipped my head around, my heart pounding. There was no one there, no camera, nothing. But the video continued, showing me exactly as I was, sitting in that cold, empty room, staring at the screen in horror. The voice came back, this time through the laptop speakers. Welcome to the grey room. The light overhead flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. I don't know how long I was in there. Minutes? Hours? Time didn't feel real anymore. I just sat there in the dark, too scared to move, waiting for whatever was coming. But nothing happened. No one came for me. No one spoke. It was just silence. Eventually, I worked up the courage to turn on my phone's flashlight. The room was empty. The chair, the laptop, everything was gone. It was just me, alone in that cold, concrete box. When I finally found my way out of the building, the sky was dark. My car was still parked outside, but something was different. There was a piece of paper tucked under the windshield wiper. I pulled it out, my hands trembling. The message was written in the same red ink I'd seen before. You belong to us now. That was a week ago. I don't know what they did to me in that room, but something's changed. I feel it. Like there's something inside me now. Something I can't explain. I see things I shouldn't see. Hear things I shouldn't hear. And the worst part? I keep dreaming about the grey room. Every night, I wake up in a cold sweat, the symbols burned into my mind, the voice echoing in my ears. You belong to us now. I've tried to go back to my old life, but it's impossible. Every time I step outside, I feel their eyes on me. Every time I check my phone, there's another message, another reminder that I'll never be free. I don't know what they want. I don't know why they chose me. But I do know one thing. The grey room wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. I found a dark web ad selling rare animals. The pet they delivered isn't from this world. Alright, so let me preface this by saying I've always been that guy who likes to explore the darker corners of the internet. You know, that curious kid in middle school who heard about the deep web and immediately Googled how to access it. Flash forward to now. I'm in my mid-20s, working a boring IT job, and the thrill of finding something genuinely weird online has become like my guilty pleasure. Think urban legends, obscure YouTube channels, creepy Reddit threads, anything that makes you question reality for just a second. So, yeah, that's where my head was at when this all started. It was a Saturday night, and I was doing the usual, scrolling Reddit, half watching some Netflix true crime documentary in the background. You know, the one where they always interview the neighbor who's like, he seems so normal. Anyway, after a few beers and way too much time alone with my thoughts, I decided to hop onto the Tor browser. For those of you who don't know, that's basically the portal to the deep web, a place that's either overhyped or underexplored, depending on who you ask. Now, before you get the wrong idea, I'm not out here buying illegal stuff or hiring hitmen or whatever. I just explore. There's a weird thrill in seeing how far down the rabbit hole goes, but this time, I think I might have dug too deep. I stumbled across a marketplace I hadn't seen before. It was called Hidden Wonders. The site looked super janky, like one of those old GeoCities pages from the early 2000s. The homepage had this giant tagline in red, glitchy text. What you can't find, we deliver. Below that were categories like artifacts, services, and most interestingly, rare animals. I know. Huge red flag, right? But in my head, I'm thinking it's just exotic pets or something. Like, yeah, probably illegal, but nothing too crazy. I clicked on the rare animals section, and that's when I felt this weird sinking feeling in my chest. The listings were bizarre. We're talking about animals I'd never heard of before. One ad was for something called a moonfish, which, according to the description, could breathe air and light up like bioluminescent algae. Another was a fanged lemur, which apparently could mimic human speech. It all seemed fake, obviously. I figured it was some kind of scam, but then I saw it. The ad that changed everything. The title was short and simple. For the discerning owner, the perfect pet. No picture, no flashy descriptions, just a single line underneath. Unprecedented, unmatched, undiscovered. $2,500. Now, normally, I'd brush this off as some idiot trying to scam rich people. But there was something about it. Maybe it was the mystery of not knowing what they were selling. Or maybe it was the fact that I'd been drinking. But I clicked, Contact Seller. The page that loaded had no form, no email address, just a text box. I typed something dumb like, "Hey, interested in the ad. Can I get more info?" and hit send. I expected to either hear nothing back or get some copy-pasted scam reply. What I didn't expect was for my phone to buzz, not even 5 minutes later. The message was from an unknown number. It read, "We've been waiting for you. Payment confirms delivery. No refunds, no questions." Weird, right? But also super sketchy. There wasn't even a link to pay, just a QR code. At this point, I should have noped out. I know that. Any sane person would have closed the browser, deleted the text, and moved on with their life. But I don't know. Maybe it was boredom, or the fact that the Netflix doc was playing in the background. But I scanned the code and paid. $2,500. I felt instant regret. Like, what the hell was I even paying for? It wasn't like I expected them to deliver an actual pet to my doorstep. For all I knew, I just funded some scammer's vacation to the Bahamas. I went to bed that night, feeling stupid as hell. The next morning, I woke up to a notification on my phone. "Your delivery is on its way. Track it here." No company name, no details, just a tracking link. Against my better judgment, I clicked it. The page that loaded was like some bootleg FedEx tracker, but there was no origin location, just a delivery ETA, 10:13 p.m. that night. At this point, I was more confused than anything. I mean, how were they planning to deliver a live animal? And what kind of animal could possibly justify that kind of price tag? The day dragged on as my curiosity turned into full-blown anxiety. I kept checking the tracker, half expecting it to update with something like "delivery cancelled," but it didn't. By the time it hit 10 p.m., I was pacing my living room like a lunatic. I live in a quiet suburb, so the sound of a car pulling up is enough to make you look out the window. At exactly 10:13, I saw headlights flash outside. It wasn't a regular delivery truck. It was an old, beat-up van with no logos or plates. The driver didn't get out. Instead, they left a box on the curb, got back in the van, and drove off without even looking my way. The box was huge, like the size of a refrigerator, and covered in duct tape. There was no label, no receipt, no instructions. Just my name scrawled on the top in thick black marker. I dragged it inside, my heart pounding the entire time. The thing was heavy, and every time I shifted it, I heard something thud against the walls of the box. Something alive. For a second, I thought about calling the cops. But what was I gonna say? Hey, I bought a mystery pet on the deep web, and now there's a weird box in my living room. Yeah, that'd go over real well. So, instead, I grabbed a box cutter and started slicing through the tape. I wish I hadn't, because as soon as I cracked the box open, this smell hit me. Not just bad, unnatural, like roadkill mixed with burned hair. My eyes started watering, and I had to cover my nose just to keep from gagging. But the smell wasn't the worst part. Inside the box, nestled in layers of filthy straw, was something I can barely describe. It wasn't an animal. Not exactly. It was looking at me. Alright, so here's the thing about curiosity. It's a sick little game. You think you're in control, that you can pull back whenever you want, but the truth is, it pulls you in deeper. That box, that thing inside, I should have closed it, taped it up, and tossed it in the dumpster behind my apartment complex. But I didn't. Instead, I just stood there, staring into the kind of nightmare that doesn't make sense in daylight. At first, I couldn't even process what I was looking at. It was folded in on itself, like someone had crammed it into the box without caring if it could actually fit. Its skin, or what I think was skin, was this pale, sickly color, kind of like wax that had been left in the sun too long. The eyes, man, the eyes are what got me. They were too human, but not quite. They were this cloudy, grayish color, like cataracts, but they moved. They locked onto me the second I opened the box, and for a split second, I swear they blinked. I backed up so fast, I knocked over my coffee table. My heart was racing, and all I could think was, what the hell did I just buy? But I couldn't look away. That thing, it wasn't moving, but it was alive. You know how sometimes you can just feel something watching you? That was this, times 100. The smell was getting worse too. It wasn't just the rotting, burned hair thing anymore. There was this metallic edge to it, like blood. My stomach turned, but I couldn't stop myself. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight to get a better look. Big mistake. Its face, or what I guess you'd call a face, was all wrong. It didn't have a nose, just two slits where one should have been. The mouth was this jagged line that stretched way too far, almost to where its ears would have been if it had any. And its teeth? They weren't teeth. They were shards, like broken glass jammed into its gums. I froze when I saw its chest move. It was shallow, like it was barely breathing, but it was enough to send me into a full-on panic. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't normal. It wasn't from here. Hell, I don't even think it was from Earth. I stepped back, trying to figure out what the hell to do. Should I call animal control? The police? But how would I even explain this without sounding insane? Hi, yes. I accidentally ordered an alien on the deep web. Can you come pick it up? Yeah, no. Then it moved. It wasn't fast or sudden. It was this slow, deliberate movement, like it was testing its own body. One of its arms unfolded, and I swear to God, it had too many joints. The fingers were long and spindly, with these black, cracked nails that looked like claws. It dragged its hand across the inside of the box, making this horrible scraping noise, like nails on a chalkboard. I backed up further, almost tripping over my couch, and that's when it made this sound. It wasn't a growl or a screech or anything you'd expect from an animal. It was a voice, but not just any voice, my voice. It was like a recording, distorted and glitchy, but unmistakably me. It said, "What the hell did I just buy?" the exact words I'd spoken just moments earlier. I don't remember dropping my phone, but I must have, because the next thing I knew, the flashlight was on the floor, casting these long, horrible shadows across the thing's body. It started to pull itself out of the box, and that's when I finally snapped out of it. I grabbed the box cutter I'd used to open the package and held it in front of me, like a weapon. "Stay back!" I shouted, but my voice cracked halfway through. The thing tilted its head, almost like it was confused. Then it repeated, in that same garbled mimic of my voice, "Stay back!" I swear, my entire body was shaking at this point. I didn't know if I should try to kill it, run, or just curl up into a ball and hope it went away. But before I could make a decision, my doorbell rang. Let me tell you, I've never been so relieved and terrified at the same time. I glanced at the door, then back at the thing. It had stopped moving, like it was waiting to see what I'd do. My first thought was that maybe the driver had come back. Maybe they realized they'd delivered the wrong package or something. I edged around the box, keeping my eyes on the thing the whole time, and peeked through the peephole. There was no one there, just the empty hallway of my apartment building. The bell rang again, and this time it was followed by a knock. But here's the thing. The knock didn't come from the door. It came from inside the apartment. I spun around so fast I nearly fell over, and that's when I saw it. The thing was out of the box, standing on its twisted, too long legs. Its head was tilted toward me, and its mouth had stretched open in this grotesque grin. It raised one of its arms and knocked on the wall, mimicking the exact pattern I'd heard at the door. That was it. I ran. I bolted out of the apartment without even locking the door. I didn't care. My only thought was to get as far away from that thing as possible. I sprinted down the hallway, not even stopping to wait for the elevator. I took the stairs 2 at a time and didn't stop until I was outside. But here's the part that still keeps me up at night. When I looked back up at my apartment window, it was standing there, watching me, and it was smiling. I didn't stop running until I was 2 blocks away from my apartment complex. My chest was burning, and I could barely catch my breath, but the adrenaline was still pumping. I ducked into a nearby Starbucks, of all places. The fluorescent lights and the smell of burnt coffee were the closest thing to comfort I could find. I felt like every eye in the place was on me. This sweaty, disheveled guy who probably looked like he'd just escaped from an asylum. I grabbed my phone out of my pocket, half expecting it to be dead or smashed, but it was fine. The screen lit up, and I saw a string of missed calls. Weird thing was, none of them had a caller ID, just a blank space where the number should have been. Before I could even process that, my phone buzzed again. Another call. I hesitated for a second, but curiosity got the better of me. I answered. "Hello?" At first there was nothing but static. Then, faintly, I heard my own voice. "Hello?" The exact same tone, the same hesitation. It repeated back everything I'd just said, like some messed up game of Simon Says. I hung up immediately and turned my phone off. By now, people in the Starbucks were definitely staring. One barista even came over and asked if I was okay. I muttered something about feeling sick and bolted out of there before they could press further. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get as far away from that thing as possible. But here's the thing about fear. It messes with your head. It makes you paranoid. Every car that passed me felt like it was slowing down to watch. Every shadow seemed to move. And then I saw it. The van. That same beat-up, plateless van that had delivered the box was idling at the corner of the street. The windows were tinted, so I couldn't see who or what was inside. My heart started racing again. Was it following me? Had it been parked there this whole time? I ducked into an alley and crouched behind a dumpster, trying to steady my breathing. I felt like I was in one of those bad horror movies where the character makes all the wrong choices. I should have gone to a police station or called for help, but instead, I just sat there, frozen, waiting to see if the van would move. It didn't, not at first. But then, after what felt like hours, the engine revved and it started creeping down the street, slowly, deliberately, like it was looking for something or someone. I didn't wait to find out. I bolted through the alley, cutting across side streets and backyards, hoping to lose it. I ended up at a 24-hour McDonald's on the edge of town. The neon lights buzzing above the golden arches felt like a lifeline, and I practically ran inside. The place was nearly empty, just a couple of teenagers in the corner and an exhausted-looking cashier behind the counter. I ordered a black coffee, not because I wanted one, but because I needed some excuse to stay there. The cashier gave me a weird look, but didn't say anything. I sat in the farthest booth from the windows and tried to collect my thoughts. What was I even dealing with? That thing in the box. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't even human. And the van? Was it connected to the cellar? Or was it something else entirely? My phone buzzed again, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I'd forgotten I'd turned it back on. This time, it wasn't a call. It was a text. The sender was listed as unknown. The message said, "You shouldn't have run." I stared at the screen, my hands shaking so bad I nearly dropped the phone. Another text came through a second later. "Look outside." I didn't want to. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me not to look. But I did. The van was parked across the street. The driver's side door opened, and for the first time, I saw someone, or something, step out. At first glance, they looked human. A tall, thin man in a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat, the kind you'd see in an old noir film. But something was off. The way he moved, stiff and jerky, like a marionette being pulled by invisible strings. He, or it, started walking toward the McDonald's. My fight or flight response kicked in, and this time, I chose fight. I grabbed a metal fork from the table and held it in my hand like some pathetic weapon. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst. The door chimed as he walked in. He didn't even glance at the cashier or the teenagers. His cloudy, cataract-like eyes locked onto me immediately. "Sir, you can't be in here without shoes," the cashier said nervously, but he ignored her. He stopped a few feet from my booth, his head tilting to the side in that same unnatural way. Then he spoke, but his voice, it wasn't his voice. It was mine. "You shouldn't have run," he said, mimicking the text. I bolted out of the booth, knocking over my coffee in the process. The teenagers were staring, wide-eyed, but no one moved to help. The cashier started saying something, but I didn't stick around to hear it. I ran out the back door into the parking lot. The van was gone, but the thing inside the McDonald's, it wasn't far behind me. I didn't know where I was running to anymore. All I knew was that I couldn't stop. My lungs felt like they were on fire. My legs were screaming in protest, but I kept going. I cut through another alley, hopped a fence, and ended up in some random industrial area. The place was deserted, just a bunch of old warehouses and broken streetlights. That's when I heard it. The voice. "Why are you running?" It echoed from everywhere and nowhere, all at once. It wasn't just my voice anymore. It was layered with others, male, female, old, young. It was like a chorus of broken radios, all saying the same thing. I turned a corner and nearly tripped over my own feet. There, in the middle of the alley, was the box. The same box I'd left in my apartment. The duct tape was gone, and the flaps were open. Straw spilled out onto the pavement, and that same foul metallic smell hit me like a brick wall. And then it stepped out. But it wasn't the same as before. It had grown, its limbs longer, its grin wider. Its eyes were no longer cloudy. They were pitch black, like twin voids staring straight into my soul. It spoke again, but this time, the voice wasn't mine. You brought me here. I turned to run, but something grabbed my ankle. I looked down and saw one of its arms, impossibly long, stretching out to hold me in place. Its grip was like iron, and no matter how hard I struggled, I couldn't break free. You can't run from this. And then everything went dark. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the kind that makes your skin crawl. The kind that feels too heavy, too wrong, like the world itself was holding its breath. My head was pounding, and I could feel dried blood crusted at the corner of my mouth. I was lying on a cold concrete floor, surrounded by darkness so thick it felt like it was pressing down on me. I tried to move, but my arms and legs were bound with what felt like thick, coarse rope. The air was damp, reeking of mildew, and that same metallic stench that had been following me since I opened that damn box. My brain was racing, trying to piece together what had happened. The last thing I remembered was that thing grabbing my ankle, pulling me into the darkness. And now, this. It wasn't until I heard the whispering that I realized I wasn't alone. At first, it was faint, almost like the wind, but it grew louder the longer I stayed still. It wasn't just one voice. It was dozens, maybe hundreds, all speaking at once. Their words overlapped, garbled and incomprehensible, but every now and then I'd catch fragments. My name, my voice, my own screams, played back to me in perfect detail. I turned my head, trying to see where the whispers were coming from, but it was useless. The darkness was absolute. No windows, no cracks of light, just an endless void. Then I felt it. Something was breathing. It wasn't close, not yet, but I could feel the faint rhythm of it, heavy and deliberate, like it was circling me, watching. The whispers started to change, becoming more distinct. They weren't just repeating my name anymore. They were asking questions. Why did you open it? Do you think you can escape? Did you think we wouldn't notice? Each voice was different, but they all carried the same cold, emotionless tone, like they were studying me, dissecting me with words. I struggled against the ropes, panic setting in. My wrists were raw and bleeding, but I didn't care. I had to get out of there. I managed to shift my weight, trying to inch my way toward what I hoped was a wall or a door, but the second I moved, the breathing stopped, and then I heard footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, echoing against the concrete floor. Whoever, or whatever, was out there wasn't in a hurry. They wanted me to hear them coming. I held my breath, trying to make myself as small as possible, even though I knew it wouldn't make a difference. The footsteps stopped a few feet away from me. I felt something cold and sharp graze the side of my neck. Not a knife, claws. Long, jagged claws that traced a line down to my shoulder, leaving behind a burning sensation that made me grit my teeth to keep from screaming. And then it spoke. But it wasn't just one voice. It was all of them, layered on top of each other, a cacophony of hatred and malice that made my entire body seize up. You brought this upon yourself. The ropes fell away, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, frozen in place as the thing circled me. I could feel its presence, towering over me, its cold breath brushing against my skin. You opened the door. Suddenly, a light flickered on above me, a single dim bulb swinging from the ceiling. The room was small, no more than 10 feet by 10 feet, with walls covered in what looked like scratches. No, not scratches, marks, symbols carved into the concrete, each one more twisted and jagged than the last. And then I saw it. It was standing in the far corner of the room, hunched over like its body couldn't support its own weight. Its limbs were impossibly long, its skin stretched tight over bones that didn't look human. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and its eyes, those black, empty voids, were locked onto me. But the worst part was its mouth. That jagged, too wide grin was still there, but now it was moving, opening and closing like it was chewing on something. And then it spat. Something wet and dark hit the floor with a sickening splat. At first, I thought it was blood, but as the puddle spread, I realized it was moving. It was alive. The shadows in the room started to shift, pooling together like black ink being drawn toward the thing in the corner. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as the shadows began to take shape. Faces, dozens of faces, contorted in pain and fear, their mouths open in silent screams. They were clawing at the edges of the puddle, trying to pull themselves free, but the thing just stood there, watching. And then, one of the faces turned toward me. It was mine. I scrambled to my feet, my back pressed against the wall as the puddle began to creep toward me. The shadows writhed and twisted, reaching out with hands that weren't quite hands, clawing at the air. You can't run from this. The thing's voice was everywhere now, filling the room, filling my head. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The shadows were at my feet, and I could feel them pulling at me, dragging me down into that endless, writhing darkness. In a lost, desperate act, I grabbed the only thing within reach, a chunk of broken concrete from the floor, and hurled it at the light bulb. The bulb shattered, plunging the room back into darkness. The whispers stopped. The breathing stopped. Everything stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. And then, I heard the door creak open. A sliver of light cut through the darkness, and I saw a figure standing in the doorway. It wasn't the thing. It was a man, or at least, it looked like one. He was wearing a suit that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years, and his face was pale, almost translucent. He smiled at me, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was the kind of smile that made you feel like prey. "Ah," he said, his voice calm and almost pleasant. "You made it this far. Impressive." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. The shadows recoiled at his presence, retreating to the corners of the room like they were afraid of him. "I see you've met our delivery," he said, gesturing toward the thing in the corner. It hadn't moved, but I could feel its eyes on me. What do you want from me?" I finally managed to choke out. The man's smile widened. "Oh, it's not about what we want," he said. "It's about what you've done." And then he pointed at the symbols on the walls. "You opened the door," he said again, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And now, it's your turn to keep it closed." Before I could ask what he meant, the shadows surged forward, wrapping around me like chains. The last thing I saw was that thing in the corner, grinning as it stepped into the puddle and disappeared. And then everything went black. When I woke up again, I wasn't in that room anymore. I was somewhere else, somewhere worse. The first thing I noticed was the cold. It wasn't just physical. It was this deep, bone-chilling emptiness, like the kind of cold you feel in nightmares that never go away. I was lying on a surface that felt wet and sticky, and when I moved, the sound of my hands peeling away echoed into the void around me. I opened my eyes, and at first, I thought I'd gone blind. Everything was black, but not like darkness in a room or at night. This was different. It was suffocating, endless, the kind of darkness that feels alive, like it's watching you. Then I saw them. Eyes. Hundreds, maybe thousands of them, all floating in the darkness, watching me. They weren't human, though. They weren't even like the thing's eyes. These were wrong. Some were massive, with slitted pupils that glowed faintly like embers, while others were small and clustered together, twitching and darting in every direction. They blinked at random intervals, like they were studying me, trying to figure out if I belonged there. Spoiler alert, I didn't. I scrambled to my feet, slipping on whatever I'd been lying on, and realized I wasn't alone. There were shapes in the distance, figures moving in the shadows just out of reach. Their outlines were distorted, shifting and warping like they weren't fully solid. Every now and then, one of them would let out this low, guttural sound, like a growl or a moan, and the eyes would swivel toward it before flicking back to me. My heartbeat was the loudest thing in the world. It felt like it was echoing through my entire body, a constant reminder that I was alive in a place that shouldn't exist. That's when I heard it again, the voice. But this time, it wasn't just whispering or mimicking me. It was singing. The melody was haunting, like a lullaby played backward through a broken music box. It started soft, almost beautiful, but as it grew louder, it became distorted, harsh, like nails dragging across steel. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere, all at once, pulling me towards something I couldn't see. Against my better judgment, I followed it. The sticky ground beneath me gave way to something harder, like stone, and the air grew heavier with every step. The eyes followed me, unblinking, their gazes boring into my back. I tried not to look at the figures in the shadows, but every now and then I'd catch a glimpse of them. They weren't human. They weren't even close. One of them had too many arms, all writhing like snakes as it dragged itself across the floor. Another had no head, just a gaping hole where its chest should have been, oozing black smoke that twisted into faces before dissipating. I kept walking. Eventually, the singing stopped, and the ground beneath me turned into something even stranger. It was smooth, like glass, but when I looked down, I saw nothing but darkness stretching out below me. It felt like I was walking on the surface of a black lake. And then I saw it. The door. It stood in the middle of the void, impossibly tall and ancient. The wood was cracked and splintered, but the symbols carved into it were glowing faintly, like embers burning in the dark. They were the same symbols I'd seen in the room before, but now they were pulsing, almost alive. I didn't want to go near it, but the pull was too strong. It was like gravity, dragging me forward no matter how much I resisted. When I got closer, I realized there was something, or someone, standing in front of the door. It was the man from before, the one in the suit. Only now, he wasn't smiling. His face was blank, his eyes hollow. He looked more like a mannequin than a person, his head tilting slightly as I approached. "You're here," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "Good." I stopped a few feet away, my body trembling so hard I thought I might collapse. What is this?" I managed to choke out. "This," he said, gesturing to the door, "is what you opened." I shook my head, panic rising in my chest. "I didn't open anything. I just ordered a stupid box. I didn't—" "You opened the door," he repeated, cutting me off. "And now, you will keep it closed." I stared at him, my mind racing. What does that even mean? He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped aside, revealing the door in its entirety. There was a crack running down the center of it, and from that crack, something was seeping through. It wasn't light. It wasn't darkness. It was wrong. I can't describe it any other way. It was like looking at something that shouldn't exist, something that defied every law of reality. The more I stared at it, the more it felt like my mind was unraveling, like I was losing pieces of myself just by being near it. "You will keep it closed," the man said again, his voice echoing in my skull. And then he was gone. Just gone. The ground beneath me started to shake, and the crack in the door began to widen. The thing seeping through was moving now, twisting and writhing like it was alive. It reached out toward me, tendrils of nothingness that felt like ice and fire all at once. I tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The void stretched out infinitely in every direction, and the door was pulling me toward it. "You brought this upon yourself." The voice was back, louder than ever, coming from the door itself. The tendrils wrapped around me, dragging me closer, and I could feel my mind breaking, shattering like glass, under the weight of something I couldn't comprehend. And then, it stopped. The door slammed shut with a deafening boom, and the tendrils recoiled, disappearing back into the crack. The symbols on the door flared brightly, and for a moment, I thought it was over. But it wasn't, because now I was standing in front of the door, alone in the void, and the voices were whispering again. "Keep it closed. I don't know how long I've been here. Time doesn't work the same way in this place. The door is always in front of me, the symbols glowing faintly, the crack threatening to widen at any moment. The eyes are still watching, the figures in the shadows are still moving, and the voices, they never stop. They tell me the same thing, over and over. Keep it closed. And now, I understand. The box wasn't just a delivery. It was a choice, a trap, a way to find someone willing to take my place. So, if you're reading this, maybe you're curious. Maybe you're the kind of person who likes to explore the dark corners of the internet, just like I was. But take my advice. If you ever see an ad for the perfect pet, don't click it. Because once you open the door, there's no going back, and someone will have to take your place.